When I was 19, I wasn't just worried about my exams and who I was going to party with on the weekend. I worried about the end of the world. I would lie awake at night, worrying about rising seas swallowing cities, food shortages, nations underwater, and global chaos. I genuinely questioned whether it was ethical to bring a child into a world that I was taught would see widespread famine due to unavoidable, catastrophic climate change. And the strangest part is that no one had threatened me. All they had done is teach me. To put it into perspective, I completed a 4-year Bachelor of Science degree. And for those of you familiar with the scientific method, you will appreciate the process as an objective way to review our understandings of the things that we believe. And therefore, I expected debate. I expected discussion. Instead, I was given a narrative that goes something like this. Since humans began industrializing, we have emitted pollution to such an extent that we are now approaching tipping points that will end life as we know it. And although it is probably beyond repair and too late, there are still reparations. It is North America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan who must pay for this, and they are the only ones who are required to pay. My professor in environmental economics convinced me it was the Western world plus Japan that caused the problem. And this was called the polluter pays principle, the law that pollution needed to be internalized. These countries had to repent for their carbon dioxide emissions. Well, I'm sure most of you know that carbon dioxide is not actually a pollutant. I believe it's really called the gas of life, and without it, we would all be dead. But going back to my studies, this was terrible news. The planet was not in good health, and allegedly, it was largely the fault of Western civilization. However, my professor in global governance assured me that a global problem could be fixed by a single world government model. This one world government sounded great. Fantasies of red tape being obliterated once and for all filled my mind. And the icing on the cake is that I was even taught how to negotiate at the Conference of Parties. They were training me to be a climate scientist who believed in the science of climate change. And part of the brainwashing was to normalize addressing the problem as something political, something that could be negotiated, but never contested. So all I found was consensus, agreed upon statements like, the Earth has warmed at an unprecedented rate since 1850, the oceans are heating, and sea levels are rising. Any data that went against this narrative was simply noise, anomalies that could be smoothed out during the data analyses. And now, I realize there's a reason they never showed the raw data. It is far too telling. And it was only safe to interpret once it had come out the other end of a computer model or complex analyses. Just like that time, I came across the ice core data. It seemed like the climate had changed drastically before. It even looked like it had been much warmer. The response from my professor? I was re-educated and assured that Milankovitch cycles were not factors for current climate change, and that what we were seeing now was completely unprecedented. I was taught fear where there should have been curiosity. And most importantly, I was taught a conclusion before I ever saw the evidence. Even when I accidentally stumbled upon the evidence, I was assured it was completely irrelevant to our current predicament. It was a narrative that everyone followed and no one questioned. No debate allowed. This was simply not science. Let me give you some more examples. I left university with no idea that carbon dioxide comprised only 0.04% of Earth's atmosphere. To walk out of a science degree without that knowledge is simply outrageous. I was always taught it was a major greenhouse gas, the most significant one, a toxic pollution, and nothing could be further from the truth. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I was taught that reptiles would be misgendered by unstoppable global temperature increases, rendering them extinct, even though they had survived the past 60 million years. I was taught that trees would starve due to climate change. They intentionally used the word starve to elicit an emotional response. I was taught that most of the world's corals would be bleached by 2050 and that polar bears were struggling to hunt because their hunting ground, the ice sheets, were melting. You guessed it, they would starve and go extinct. It was unmistakable. My home, planet Earth, was dying. I felt panicked that no one was doing anything about this. It made me so anxious, then completely miserable. And then I got angry. How dare people not care? They'd got me, hook, line, and sinker. I started going on doomsday rants at parties, telling everyone we were all doomed and the world was ending unless we did something right now. The climate establishment had successfully created a mouthpiece for their agenda. I became the sort of person that ticked the box when booking a flight ticket to say, yes, I'm willing to pay a higher price to make this an environmentally friendly transaction and offset my carbon emissions. I truly believed I was saving the planet, one checkbox at a time. But no matter what I did, the message was always the same. It wasn't enough. The crisis was too big. We were already too late. And that is not objective science. That is apocalyptic storytelling, and it all began at elementary school with the global warming story. And funnily enough, my friend Roger, who's 67, felt petrified when he was at school, learning about the ice age that was coming. And my 53-year-old friend Helen tells me she was terrified and didn't see the point in doing anything with her life because she was taught nuclear winter was probably going to end life as she knew it. The story changes with each generation, but at their core, they're nothing more than doomsday narratives designed to instill fear and keep people in line. The more fearful people are, the more likely they are to accept the pre-planned response already waiting in the wings. My other friend, Patrick, has a son at school in the UK. And lo and behold, his son comes home from school one day, devastated because the world was being destroyed. Patrick showed his son the real data, which his son took to school. The school mortally offended by Patrick, re-educated his son, telling him his father was wrong and the doomsday narrative was in fact the truth. After all, 97% of climate scientists agreed. Children all over the globe are being told their home is unstable, dangerous, and on the brink of collapse. Floods, fires, storms, presented not as natural events to understand, but as proof of doom. And if they question it, the school will write to their parents. It is completely irresponsible of us to enable this. The psychological impact of these stories is crippling children's mental health, and it is simply unacceptable. The proportion of school-aged children diagnosed with anxiety in the UK tripled between 2000 and 2023 and doubled in the USA over the same time period. This is not a coincidence. And the minute they try and peddle one of these stories on my child, let me just say this: hell hath no fury like a mother who knows the truth. Because at the end of the day, these are not just innocent stories. They are being used by NGOs like the IPCC to funnel trillions of dollars to particular interest groups. These are people that cannot be held to account by the electorate, and that is simply unacceptable. It is a socialist, globalist agenda that has been carried out right beneath our noses. And it's the spitting image of the one world government framework that was prescribed in my training. And the real tragedy is they were never training scientists. They were training socialists to enact their agenda. The danger that comes with this indoctrination isn't just children being alarmed. It's that they're being trained to permanently stay that way, permanently alarmed. The kind of alarmed where you're side-eyeing a plastic straw like it's a loaded weapon. I believe the scientific term for that is alarmed and dangerous. So, how do we encourage intellectual independence in the younger generation? Changing my perspective meant re-evaluating the assumptions behind how I saw the world and relearning what I thought I knew. But what I've taken from my own journey is that it can be undone. And for me, everything changed when I realised the UK government couldn't truly believe in climate change because their policies were making food and energy less secure. I kept thinking, if a real disaster was coming, wouldn't they be trying to protect us? But instead, they were doing completely the opposite. And that realization hit hard. It meant accepting that the people who I had always trusted either didn't care or didn't even believe what they were telling me. I had always seen the government, teachers, and professors as sources of truth. So when that trust broke, everything began to unravel. Because when the people you trust turn out not to be what they seemed, the illusion doesn't shatter all at once, but slowly it fades away. And to really crack this, it must come from the top. We have to abolish the climate crisis from the curriculum. And you are so lucky to have a president who's bold enough to have left all United Nations architecture. And I'm sure if he hasn't already addressed the indoctrination in education, then it will be on his agenda. And in the meanwhile, we've got to get clever about this. Because if I was in university and someone came up to me and told me that everything I was taught is wrong, firstly, I would have been extremely offended because I was learning the cutting-edge science, thank you very much. And secondly, I would have just justified their concerns by assuming they simply didn't care about the Earth. However, I believe young people today are just waiting for permission to be rebellious and question authority. So what can we do to spark that first crack in the indoctrination? My suggestion is to capitalize on the popularity of climate realism influencers to engineer a hashtag movement, like Me Too, but for truth. Something like hashtag fact check or hashtag #MyClimateWakeUp. Imagine 20 climate realism influencers, including people like Chris, Lucy, myself, all coming together with more than 1 million followers between us, coordinating our posts across platforms, getting millions of reposts, likes, and shares. Then imagine thousands of young voices posting. I used to believe the world was burning. The fact that broke my indoctrination was wildfires are decreasing. What broke yours? Hashtag #MyClimateWakeUp. Or, now I'm fact-checking for myself. Hashtag fact check. Not to be confused with fat check, something 97% of climate scientists also agree is important. We want to turn this fat check movement into a fact check movement. We want this to go viral. We want this to go viral. This whole thing was media-driven in the first place, and sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. We've seen social media shift generations before. Social media is the new media. So let's use it for prosperity, realism, and hope. The very future of scientific integrity depends on this. So let's do it. Gather the influencers, launch the hashtag, open the doors for every young person ready to fact check, relearn, and choose evidence over emotion. The climate realism movement needs young leaders who are curious enough to break free. I was told it was settled. I was told it was urgent. I was told to comply. But science was never meant to be settled. It was meant to be challenged, and challenge it I shall. Thank you.